It's still too early for me to comp them to him since I like to wait for players to be in the league for at least 3 years before using them as comps, but there were just so many times I watched Golden I felt like I was watching a taller version of Zay Flowers, who could potentially be a better version of Flowers thanks to his better ball attacks and ball skills. Hey y'all! For this video we'll be continuing going through the 2025 wide receiver prospects and have one of the most talented parts of these whole series, as I'll be covering Kyle Williams from Washington State, LaJohntay Wester from Colorado, Luther Burden III from Missouri, Matthew Golden from Texas, and Nick Nash from San Jose State. If you're new to these, my wide receiver evals use some different grading methods, which you want more details on these. You can check out part 1 of my series, which should be accessible to the link that should be on screen now, as I have more details on how I do my grading in that. Also, if you want to check out my grades and evals of the receivers from last year for reference, you can check that out with a link in the description. For any new viewers, I have evals and full scouting reports out for players like Emeka Ibuka, Elikayo Manor, Isaiah Bond, Jack Besh, Jalen Royals, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, and more, which you can check out on my channel. I'll be continuing going through my top 50 receivers in the draft, so be sure you don't miss any other parts of the series or any other position group series in the future. Be sure to subscribe. Now let's take a look at Williams. Taking a look at Williams' basic stats, his production is part of the reason why he's been a big riser for a lot of people lately. In 2024, he racked up 101 targets and converted those into 70 receptions for 1,198 yards and a ridiculous 14 touchdowns. He did have a fair amount of drops at 5 for the year, but with the context of that being on 101 targets, that made his drop rate just 6.7%, which isn't as bad as it was on first glance. Also, despite his average build, he played the majority of snaps from the outside, with nearly 3/4 of his snaps coming from there in 2024, and routinely played on the outside in his previous seasons, playing on the outside about 75% of his snaps. I didn't have too many choices to go with. I ended up going with his bowl game against Syracuse and his regular season matchups against Boise State and Washington. Williams was fantastic in his matchup against Syracuse and Boise State, putting up at least 9 receptions, 142 yards, and a touchdown in both matchups. Now, his Washington game was a lot less impressive with just 3 receptions for 22 yards, which looks even worse considering he got 8 targets that game. Look at his full season. He's a very consistent force, getting at least 5 receptions in 7 of his 12 games, at least 50 yards in 9 of his 12, and a touchdown in 8 of his 12. Now, I mentioned before I didn't have a lot of great choices for his highlight games because Washington State had an extremely easy schedule, with their toughest matchups being Syracuse and Boise State, who both have bad defenses. Outside of those games, Washington likely was the next hardest matchup, but then after them it becomes a contest between a lot of Mountain West teams, Oregon State, and Texas Tech. So I think it's a very fair argument that Williams may have just been beating up on lesser opponents throughout the year. But to know for sure if that was the case, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he can make some really impressive catches by going low while shielding the ball from the ground and going up high to high point it. He also does a really good job working back to the quarterback to make himself an easier target for the QB. This also played a part in him being more successful in his contested catch situations than you'd expect for a player his size, with a success rate of 62.5%. He's also able to help expand his catch radius with the ability to finish catches over his shoulders and around the sidelines. That being said, his hands are a bit more inconsistent than I would like. His hands can sometimes be a little bit delayed when working down the field, and he doesn't always attack the ball with good hand technique. Those lapses, especially occurring down the field, do make me a little bit nervous about his ball tracking skills, and if those lapses will be more frequent if he got more shots downfield. So Williams ended up earning a B- for his hands, as well as a B for both his jump ball and contested catch, and body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, his release is very solid with very good timing with his feet to help get his route off on a good start. Also, he does a good job using arm counters to help keep himself clean. He also has a variety of moves that help him get leverage, which really shows on nearly every slant pattern that he was able to run. Now, while his route running wasn't perfect, he does show some good nuance to build off of. He uses a good tempo in his routes and does a good job selling his vertical to make his hitch route a lot more successful. Also, he does a good job making clean cuts in his routes. Though he does use some nuance in his route tree is still pretty limiting, which does concern me as it seems like he nearly ran all slants, hitches, and vertical routes. He can sometimes have a bit of trouble stopping in his routes on sharper cuts as well, like his hitch routes, which can lead him to cutting upfield a little bit further than he wanted to. He also lacks explosiveness in his cuts, which can make it a little bit easier for defenders to cover him and affects his ability to separate. In general, he had fluctuating ability to be able to separate and typically had a defender trailing close behind him. His struggles to play through physical coverage also played a role in his inconsistency to separate. Physical corners just really bothered him and moved him well off his route path too frequently. He also didn't show great awareness for avoiding contact from peripheral defenders during his route and failed to adjust his path to be able to keep a clean route. Speaking of adjusting, while he will do a good job adjusting his route when the quarterback scrambles, he's often unable to create separation in those situations. He also can struggle to find openings against the defense when he faces zone coverage. His vertical ability is also a bit disappointing against better competition. With his slow build-up speed, defenders are often able to either catch up to him or just be prepared to cover him. His trouble stacking defenders made this issue even worse and made it harder for the quarterback to be able to hit him down the field. So things got off course for Williams with a C- for his route running, but bounced way back up to a B+ for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism or RAS, there was a good balance to be able to stay up after some weak arm tackles. Also, he's shifty and has good timing with his cuts to be able to make defenders miss as well. He also showed impressive vision on screen passes and end arounds and has very good patience to use his blocks to maximize his gains. Also, he does put in some good effort as a blocker and really seems to be willing to pick up extra blocks to be able to help his teammates. Despite that willingness though, the end product of his blocks just is often pretty rough and typically leads to poor results. Also, while his final 40 time was good, it's a bit more concerning when we look at the splits. Both his 10 and 20 yard splits were average at best and more aligned with players who run 40s around the 4.6s. So what that means is his build-up speed and acceleration are lacking, even if he can eventually get to a good speed if he eventually gets to a clean runway. The problem is in the NFL, you almost never get a clean runway. So he'll be moving more at speeds like a 4.6 receiver, which with his build, it now kind of starts to make a lot of sense why he had a lot of trouble with physical coverage. For how he fits in the NFL, it's tricky since I think I'm against consensus here. While I know he has a lot of fans who are big fans of his traits, I think he's just fine in a lot of areas, but not great in anything other than his release. The issue is that with his smaller build and lack of acceleration, it becomes tricky for those types of players to be consistent contributors in the NFL. Also, while he has good release skills, teams may just want to move it into the slot due to his build and lack of quick speed, which could be a transition that he has to adjust to. I think he could be fine on the outside, but I think it will likely come down to how teams feel about his build holding up and where he is as a route runner. So though he isn't a great athlete, he still earned a B+ in his yards after catch potential thanks to his vision and tackle evasion skills. However, he earned much worse grades with a C for his future role and C- for his athleticism or RAS. As for a summary of his strengths, his release skills instantly stand out and are a big part of why he was so successful in 2024. Also, he showed some nice ball tracking and body adjustment skills to be able to expand his catch radius despite his average size. Also, despite his average athleticism, he is very shifty in space and combines that with solid contact balance and good vision to be able to contribute after the catch more than you'd expect for someone based on his combine results. However, while he was very productive in 2024, he ran a pretty limited route tree which could make it more difficult for him to transition to the NFL. Also, he really struggles with physical coverage, which could get worse in the NFL when he faces better competition than a lot of the Mountain West corners that he did face. His lack of athleticism also showed at times with his cuts often lacking explosiveness, and his slow build-up speed decreasing his vertical success. Finally, while he does give good efforts in his blocks, he was a pretty poor blocker and will likely have limited ability to contribute in this area in the NFL. So by taking the average falls grades, Williams earned a 2.58 out of 4, which puts him in my may have a future role tier. I understand that Williams is growing a number of fans, but I just think he's more limited than people want to admit. He is limited as a route runner and limited athletically with a smaller frame. On top of that, his hands can have some inconsistencies as well, which just makes it harder to be able to trust him on an every down basis. As for a comp, I have another player who others were much higher on than me during his draft cycle, in John Mechie III. Both can make sharper cuts in their routes, giving them easier leverage, and both can also show solid release skills and yards after catch ability to potentially give them a solid floor. However, neither are explosive and struggle to get consistent separation due to lack of explosiveness in their cuts and difficulty dealing with physical coverage. Also, both can have some lapses in their hand technique and lack great athleticism to burn defenders deep on vertical routes. Mechie has had a complicated career due to his previous cancer diagnosis, although even if he had stayed healthy, I honestly wasn't overly confident he was going to be a major contributor. I have similar feelings for Williams, who I think could just be a fine complementary receiver. However, I don't see a sleeper starting receiver like I've seen other people suggest. Going to our next receiver, LaJohntay Wester from Colorado. Taking a look at his basic stats, after Travis Hunter, Wester was Colorado's second most productive receiver, getting 92 targets and converting those for 74 receptions and a really great 10 touchdowns. Now, he did have 3 drops in the season, which led to him having a drop rate of 3.9% for the 2024 season, which that drop rate is pretty good, and it's even better when we consider that all of them actually came against Nebraska. So had that game not happened, he would have had 84 targets without a single drop, which is very impressive. Also, it likely won't surprise anyone, but with his 5'10", 163-pound frame, he played from the slot on nearly every snap for his 2024 season and has done so throughout his career. Taking a look at his highlight games against BYU, Kansas State, and Nebraska, despite being Colorado's number 2 receiver, he was just kind of okay in a lot of these games. He did get 4 receptions all of their highlighted games and got 50 yards against BYU and Kansas State, but he just barely got over 50 yards in those games. Looking at the rest of his season, he consistently did a good job getting good volume, getting at least 5 receptions 8 of his 13 games, and while he didn't get 100 or more yards very often, he did get more than 50 yards in 10 of his 13 games. So he's kind of looking like a player with a possible high floor, but a low ceiling. So let's take a look at his grades to see how high that floor might be. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, after struggling with drops, his hands took a big step forward in 2024, which can be seen with his drop rate improving from 10.1% in 2023 to that 3.9% in 2024. He got the ball with much better hand technique and did a good job consistently catching away from his body this year. Extending his arms also helped improve his success in contested catch situations, with it improving from 47.6% in 2023 to 66.7% in 2024. I also felt like he did a good job expanding his catch radius this season as well. He did a good job going high and especially going low to make himself a more viable target for his quarterback. He also showed some good ball tracking skills to be able to follow the ball downfield and make a last-second adjustment to the ball to give the defense a little clue where the ball is. Now, while he was more successful in contested catch situations in 2024, that was just on 12 opportunities, which does make me a little bit nervous about trusting that he's truly become that good, or at least as good as his rate suggests. And the fact that he has pretty short arms and a small frame, and his success rate in contested catch situations could decrease in the NFL. Also, while he does have a bigger sample size to be able to show that he has less drops, he'll need to prove that his improved hands are here to stay and won't regress back to being poor again like some players sometimes do. As a Packers fan, I'm looking at you, Dontavian Wicks. So Wester got off to a good start with an A- for his hands, B- for his jump ball contested catch, and A- for his body control ball tracking. For his route running release, he showed a good eye for openings against zone and quick feet to quickly move through his cuts. However, he did have to be hidden from press due to his small frame and likely will be bound to the slot in the NFL. His small frame just caused a lot of issues dealing with contact in his routes, as he was often redirected by physical coverage and didn't do the best job at avoiding defenders blocking his path. I was also pretty disappointed in his cuts. As I mentioned, he has quick feet, so I was hoping he'd be able to make some cleaner cuts. Instead, he tended to just round a lot of his cuts. Those rounded cuts and his struggles dealing with contact led him to be an inconsistent separator, especially on downfield targets. So after a good start, Wester fell hard with a C for his route running and a D- for his release, which also, that D- is tied with his teammate Jimmy Horn Jr. for the worst release grade of the class. For his yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism RAS, his quick feet helped him after the catch as he had good timing with his cuts to be able to avoid tackles and even manipulate defenders. His vision from his return background also showed his ability to follow his blocks and even adjust his path to set up blocks. That vision let him be more creative in space rather than just moving in a straight line. That being said, if he does want to just try to settle and outrun defenders, he does have adequate speed to be able to pick up yards. But he also has good curvilinear movements that he's able to use to be able to weave around defenders to add a bit more value when he has the ball in his hands. Now, while he did show good shiftiness, his small frame did make it difficult for him to stay up after contact as he regularly was taken down by first hit. His frame also caused issues in his ability to be able to hold up in his blocks, and he was often blown back by defenders. Also, he struggled to get square with his target and struggled to get his proper hand placement, which made things even harder for him. As for how he would fit in the NFL, as I mentioned, I think he would likely need to be a slot-only player. Players can still be contributors in those types of roles, but it's not often they make it work with Wester's build and with his lack of explosiveness that he has. While it's good that his hands did improve, I think his frame and lack of burst may just be too great for him to be able to overcome and to be a regular contributor. I think his best option may be to try to use his returner background and try to secure a role in special teams and hope that he can work his way into the offense down the road. So Wester's fall continued with a C+ for his yards after catch potential, C- for his future role, and a very poor F+ for his athleticism or RAS. For a summary of his strengths, he made big-time improvements with his hands both on routine catches and in contested catch situations that shouldn't be ignored and hopefully are here to stay. Also, he continued to make good body adjustments to balls away from his frame to have a bigger catch radius and give him a better chance to make an impact in the NFL. Finally, he's a very creative player in open space thanks to his return experience, and also showed good cuts and movement skills to be able to pick up yards in open space. That being said, I was just a bit underwhelmed by him as a route runner. He has a tendency to rush and round his cuts, which also played a part in him not always having great leverage. He was also a poor separator down the field, which reduces his impact he can have and often limits his passes being closer to the line of scrimmage. At the very least, those types of routes close to the line of scrimmage do align with slot receivers, which will have to be in the NFL due to having way too thin of a frame. Finally, that thin frame also presents problems when he's going for blocks, as well as holding up on his routes against contact. So by taking the average of all his grades, Wester earned a 2.12 out of 4, which puts him in my unlikely to contribute tier. While Wester made some improvements, he's still just very limited athletically and with his frame. I think he's likely a reserve slot receiver at the best in the NFL, but I think teams would be asking him too much if they try to put him in a starter role. At the very least, a team could justify him having him on the roster as a reserve slot player if he's able to contribute as a returner in the NFL. As for a comp, I have Braxton Berrios as his comp. Both have return ability and show good vision and enough athleticism in open space. Also, both have good hands and the ability to expand their limited catch radius. However, their catch radius is still limited due to shorter arms, which could cause more issues in the NFL. Also, neither held up well against press and are likely slot exclusive players. Berrios has been used regularly as a returner in the NFL, but sparingly on offense. That has at least let him look solid, as he hasn't been asked to do too much in his limited opportunities. As I mentioned earlier, I think that's probably the best approach for Wester to get a solid contributor role on an offense and be a reliable returner on special teams. Now getting to some of the really exciting and well-known names in the class, starting with the consensus top receiver of the class going into the season, Luther Burden III from Missouri. Looking at his basic stats, it probably would look like he got injured, but it was just a big mess of a year for Burden. So his totals of getting 81 targets for 61 receptions, 676 yards, and 6 touchdowns were in fact his totals through 12 games in 2024. Also, he did have a few drops with 3 for the year, which translates to a drop rate of 4.7%, which isn't that bad in the grand scheme of things. Also, there's been a lot of discussion about his snaps from the slot, and he again played a majority of snaps from the slot for 2024, with about 85% of his snaps there, which is slightly higher than his 2023 rate, which was at about 82%. Taking a look at his highlighted games against South Carolina, Alabama, and Texas A&M, we can see the Burden experience with good games against South Carolina and Texas A&M, getting at least 7 receptions and 69 yards in each game, but then a miserable game against Alabama getting just 3 receptions for 3 yards. Getting 1 yard per reception is really hard to do, but somehow Bird found a way to do it. Look at his full season, his volume was decent with at least 5 catches in 8 of his 12 games, but he failed to hit double digits receptions in any of his games in 2024. Also, his yards also showed a decent floor with at least 50 yards in 7 of his 12 games, but he only reached 100 or more yards just once this year after doing it 6 times in 2023. So it looks a lot like Wester's high floor, low ceiling, which is fine if we're talking about a player like Wester, but this is supposed to be a possible first round pick and one of the top receivers of the class. So to try to figure out what happened, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he catches the ball with really good hand technique and consistently catches the ball away from his body. Though some receivers will see a dip in their prove-it years, Burden's hands were still very strong with a drop rate under 5% for the 2024 and 2023 seasons. Speaking of strong hands, he has very tough hands and isn't afraid to make catches over the middle of the field through contact, with a success rate of 54.5% on contested catches for 2024 and 47.8% for his entire career. Outside of his hands, he's also an appealing target due to his ability to make plays on balls. He showed great timing with his attacks and made some really impressive adjustments to poorly placed balls. Also, he showed the strength to be able to leap through contact and still make a play on jump balls. His ball tracking goes underappreciated due to primarily working underneath, but it's very good. He's very capable of following the ball downfield and finishing catches over his shoulders. However, while his ball skills were good the times he was targeted this year, he didn't come off as battle-tested as a lot of the other receivers in the class who were regularly handling over 10 targets a game this year. So there can be an argument people think that Burden's hands may not be as good if he were to have more volume. So if mostly just hypotheticals in his way, he earned A- for his hands and jump ball and contested catch, and then a great A for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running release, though he has played the majority of his snaps from the slot, he did have good experience playing from the outside during his true freshman year. Also, improvements will be needed, but he has the twitch and movement skills that a lot of great receivers and route runners have in the NFL, and he did show flashes where he was able to put together good tempo and break down his cuts to make some really crisp cuts. However, while those flashes were good to see, they were just too few and far between. He's still behind as a route runner and has minimal nuance and deception in his routes. In most cases, he typically just runs to a spot that he knows he needs to get to, but doesn't have much of a plan and often just telegraphs his route to the defender. He also doesn't show a good understanding how to win leverage on most plays, especially has a hard time winning leverage when the defender squats in the area he wants to work to. Also, he showed a fair amount of indecisiveness in finding openings against zone, which will need to improve if he wants to be a successful slot receiver in the NFL. He'll also need to be able to improve his peripheral vision and awareness as he struggles settling into open space and can find himself trailing towards defenders. His route tree has also been very limited these past 2 seasons since he moved to the slot, and was especially shallow this past season. For the routes he did run, he had very poor cuts that were often rushed with little sharpness. Those poor cuts were also another reason why he had some trouble getting consistent separation. Another thing that led to those struggles were difficulty getting open with his release. He often didn't need to worry about press from the slot, but the times he did or played out wide, he didn't seem like he really had a good plan for against the press. Also, despite his great athleticism, he showed a pretty limited release package, which is disappointing that he couldn't win leverage with the athleticism to be able to avoid contact more frequently. The inability to avoid contact in his release led to defenders getting their hands on him, which often led to him getting pushed off his route path. So as good as Burden's start was, his route running and release were both very poor, earning him a C- for both. For his yards after catch potential, future role and athleticism to rest, he's a seamless transition from receiver to rusher and is so quick at getting his head turned around and be ready to make a move in open space. He's also tough to bring down thanks to running with good pad level, having good balance, and having good foot speed. His vision also shines as he can follow blocks and even shows the ability to set up his blocks downfield. Another underrated aspect of his game is his blocking. He's a very willing blocker and does a good job using leverage and does a good job getting square with his target. Despite being viewed as a top weapon on the offense, he also showed a willingness to make a block and hold his block with active feet. So though I don't think I have seen any criticisms about his effort, I just want to put it out there just in case there are any possible concerns about his effort that it led to his poor production, since his good effort was on display every single play. As for what did lead to his poor production, I know it's a cop-out, but I do really think that Brady Cook, Missouri's quarterback, was a primary cause of this. If you didn't watch Missouri, Cook was very, very bad and was worse than his season totals even suggest. Also, as for why he was moved to the slot after playing the majority of snaps outside during his freshman year, I think a part of that was just realizing the limitations of Cook, and the team wanted to find a way to make Burden the team's best playmaker and easier target for him. So despite being used as a slot receiver these past 2 seasons, between the experience as a freshman and having the traits and physical tools to be able to make it on the outside, I do think he can make that switch if needed. Now, while I do want to be optimistic about Burden's lack of production being attributed to Cook's struggles, I can't ignore Theo Weiss's production this past year. Though I strongly feel Burden is a better player than Weiss, which, spoiler alert when we get to Weiss's section, Weiss finished with just as many receptions, but more yards than Burden, which may make teams second guess Burden. Also, while Burden is great after the catch, he can sometimes be a bit hesitant with his moves, which can give defenders enough time to be able to make clean tackle attempts on him. Also, while his effort and quality of blocks are solid, sometimes his base can be a little bit weak leading up to his block, leading to him not holding his block as long as he could. As for the fit in the NFL, I think he has the build and athleticism to become one of the league's top receivers with the right development plan. Now the question is if he'll continue to be plateaued in his development and not take a step forward. If he doesn't take the next step forward, he'll still be a good yak player, but will likely cause some teams to have buyer's remorse so they don't have an offensive coordinator who can get the most out of Burden. So Burden earned a great A- for his yards after the catch potential, a very good B+ for his future role, and an estimated A- for his athleticism or RAS. For a summary of his strengths, he has fantastic hands that didn't get to be on display enough in 2024. However, in the few opportunities he had, he shined with the way he was able to make impressive adjustments to throws and track the ball downfield. He's also one of, if not the best weapon after the catch in this class, and could make an offensive coordinator very happy if he's able to be paired in the right system. Finally, despite being viewed as a top receiver, he didn't shy away from laying down some quality blocks and regularly giving good effort. Now, as much as I do want to be optimistic about Burden, I can't pretend that his lack of polish in his routes doesn't concern me. To make things worse, he ran a limited route tree these past few years at Missouri, and still is working to win with his release, which could become a disaster if he doesn't improve in those areas. It was already a disaster this year with his plummeting production, which could also scare away some teams. Also, with him playing the majority of his snaps from the slot these past 2 seasons, that could also scare away teams as they may feel he might be slot exclusive and may not be able to play on the outside, which could limit how many teams he could fit on the roster for. So by taking the average of all his grades, Burden earned a 3.17 out of 4, which puts him at good starter tier. While consensus has soured on Burden, I think people are overcorrecting their evaluations and are now underrating him. Despite the down year statistically, he still has the great hands, body adjustments, and athleticism that made him an exciting prospect leading up to the season. Now I will admit that it is frustrating to still see him have a lot of the same issues in route running and release. However, if his release continues to not make further development, NFL teams can just hide him in the slot or use him in motion as a Z. The biggest thing that Burden has to do is improve his route running. It's still way too sloppy and needs to get better to be more consistent in the NFL. That being said, he does have the athletic profile that can translate to a better route runner with the right coaching. As for his comp, I'll stick with my mid-season comp that I had for Burden and go with another player who was a very sloppy route runner in college, but has turned into one of the best route runners in the NFL, Brandon Ayuk. Now that comp may sound very odd since Ayuk is a true X-receiver, but like Burden, Ayuk was a very poor route runner and ran a very limited route tree at Arizona State before he entered the NFL. Ayuk also shined with his great hands, ball tracking skills, and ability to use athleticism to rise up for jump balls and make plays in the open field. I did think Ayuk was a year ahead of Burden's in terms of developing as an outside receiver thanks to taking more snaps outside in college. However, I can see Burden following a similar development plan with the right coaching staff. If he does that, I think he can meet the high expectations he had going into the 2024 season and give a team a great value pick later in the first round. Also, I saw JJ Zacharyson also come up with the same Ayuk comp, so at least I feel like I'm not alone in this projection of his talent. Going to our next receiver, and one of the fastest risers and fastest runners in this class, Matthew Golden from Texas. We talked about Golden potentially being on track to be the first receiver taken in the draft. You might expect better production than just 83 targets for 58 receptions, 987 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Also, his drops are having 4 drops for a drop rate of 6.5% doesn't exactly scream first-round talent either. Also, for context, and some people may have missed Golden for a lot of the year, Golden played the majority of snaps from the outside with slightly over 75% of his snaps from the outside in 2024. Now, the reason why people may have missed him for a lot of the year was because he didn't really have high expectations early on in the year, but caught fire at the end of the season and in the playoffs, which we can see in his highlighted games against Ohio State, Arizona State, and the SEC championship game against Georgia. Golden was incredible against Arizona State and Georgia, making at least 7 receptions for at least 149 yards in both games. Unfortunately, he failed to continue that momentum against Ohio State, finishing with just 2 receptions for 51 yards due to an ankle injury he had early in the game that did seem to affect him for the rest of the game. For the rest of the season, this is where things start to turn into a big litmus test, or makes people have to decide how they value a player's production throughout the whole season, as he had at least 5 receptions in just 5 of his 16 games, which are even worse if we move the playoffs games, as it would actually just be 3 out of 12 non-playoff games then. And his yard totals similarly was also inconsistent, getting at least 60 yards in 6 of his 16 games when including the playoffs, but just 4 of 12 if we exclude the playoffs. Now it feels kind of weird removing playoff games from a player's profile, especially when those are the most important games of the season, and his ability to step up in those games is a big reason why he has become such a hot name. However, with his sudden rise, let's see if his grades suggest that his rise is actually a more steady one that was just overlooked. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, Golden has great hands and focus, which showed on a number of one-handed catches he made this season. Despite a lot of the other usual speeder receivers having trouble with this, Golden consistently caught the ball away from his body and consistently attacked the ball in the air. He has great timing with his attacks and is capable of making some really impressive body adjustments without breaking stride. Also, the way that he can make catches at the very end of his frame and rise up for balls will make a lot of people think he's bigger than he actually is if you just watch him and don't check his actual size. He also doesn't shy away from contact and is willing to go into traffic to make a play on the ball. He has such great hand strength and good arm extension to get his hands on the ball first, which showed with him converting 61.1% of his contested catches for 2024. His ball tracking skills are also very impressive, the way he can track lofted deep balls and finish catches over his shoulders. However, he can be prone to some focus drops as we saw the number of drops he had in the season. Also, while his ability to make catches at the end of the season was fantastic, his drop rate and success rates in contested catch situations, both being much worse in past years with a drop rate being more around 11% and contested catch rate being more around 35%, do make it risky to be able to trust that his improved hands are here to stay. So though I am a bit cautious, I do want to give credit where it's due, as he ended up earning a B for his hands, B+ for his jump ball and contested catch, and an A- for body control and ball tracking. For his route running release, I expect to have the usual struggles of speed receivers against press, but I actually came away pretty impressed. His feet definitely do the heavy lifting, but he is so shifty with his release with great timing and diversity that it often led to a win. As a route runner, he is a bit of a mixed bag, but has a lot of potential and a good understanding of some of the harder concepts in route running. He's really good at establishing leverage on most plays, and also runs his intermediate and deep routes with really good tempo to get separation. Also, he knows how to get the cornerback's hips turned around and be able to win with athleticism the rest of the way. He also understands how to use vertical speed as a threat to be able to sell his vertical and then break back to the quarterback on a hitch and in-breaking routes. While his cuts can use some work, he does show some flashes of having some really great hip sync and explosion to be able to make some really effective cuts. However, while his cuts are quick, the majority of them are still very rounded due to not breaking down in his cuts enough and rushing through his breaks. Also, though he can use some good tempo, it still feels like he's just kind of trying to rely on his he still feels like he's often relying on his great athleticism at times to be able to win. I like to see him throw a bit more deception with jab steps and head fakes to add another wrinkle to his tempo. Also, he did run a limited route tree, which is pretty common for Texas receivers nowadays, and he'll need to prove he can handle a more diverse route tree. What is also common for Texas receivers is fluctuating efforts in their routes. A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy got some cautionary flags from people due to this popping up in several games last year, and the same showed up for Golden. Similar to what I said about Mitchell and Worthy though, I don't think Golden has effort issues, and his effort in his blocking is a sign of that, as he's willing to do what's best for the team. Regardless, I want to see Golden show better awareness against zone coverage, as he often didn't look comfortable finding and settling into openings in the zone coverage, and often let himself back into coverage. Also, he didn't always show good awareness of where to navigate when his quarterback broke from the pocket, which could lead to missed opportunities in the NFL if he goes to a scrambling or running quarterback. What may also cause some opportunities is his release not being able to take a step forward. Like I said, while he can get separation in his release thanks to his feet, he needs to improve his hand use and timing to be able to have more consistent success. He just seems to struggle using arm counters right now, and often just lets the defenders get their hands on him too easily. That lets more physical corners bully him and redirect his path too frequently. So though there is potential, Golden earned just a C+ for his route running, but earned a solid B for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role and athleticism or RAS, Golden turned heads at the combine running a 4.29 40-yard dash. Now, is he a 4.29 runner on the field? No. But he still has a lot of speed that he brings to his routes that we see on an every route basis. However, he isn't just limited to straight line speed, as he has great acceleration and shiftiness that gives him a lot of potential in yards after catch situations. He also has a quick transition from receiver to runner to help him get to full speed very quickly. His vision with the ball and the flashes of slipperiness were also impressive, and makes me even more confident he can be a weapon in these situations if given this chance. He also shows some really good effort in his blocks, which adds a bit more to his versatility and could help him stay on the field as a rookie. As for his fit in the NFL, that is, pun intended, the golden question. Golden has great athleticism, fluid movement skills, and great ball skills to play bigger than his size. It's still too early for me to comp him to him since I like to wait for players to be in the league for at least 3 years before using them as comps, but there were just so many times I watched Golden I felt like I was watching a taller version of Zay Flowers, who could potentially be a better version of Flowers thanks to his better ball attacks and ball skills. And I think that speaks to his possible ceiling. However, his floor could be going back to a player who was at Houston who looked like a contributor but nothing special. So it's going to be very important for teams to be able to figure out who the real Golden is and if they can trust his progressions that he showed in the playoffs. Personally, I'm willing to trust it since player regression is a natural part of the game and shouldn't be ignored. However, I can totally understand how NFL franchises who actually need to pull the trigger and make the draft pick may be more cautious. Finally, while he can show a lot of guts as well, I do also want to just see him have some more self-preservation as he struggled with injuries in the past few years due to putting himself at risk with the way he flings his body around the field. So, it doesn't really matter how well he is able to make those progressions. If he's not able to stay on the field, that will be a whole nother issue. So Golden finished things out on a high note like he did in the playoffs, with a B+ for his yards after catch potential and future role, as well as an estimated A- for his athleticism. For a summary of his strengths, he has really good ball skills and hands to play bigger than his size, and give himself a bigger catch radius to be a bigger playmaker. Also he has great athleticism, which also lets him be a bigger playmaker down the field and in shorter areas after the catch. Finally, while his route running isn't quite there yet, he did show really good fundamentals in his route running to one day become a route technician, and consistently win with a combination of his athleticism and routes. However, as he is now, he still runs with a lot of rounded cuts and can miss openings against zone coverage. Also, while he was good against press in college from what I saw, he needs to have better use of his arms to be able to ensure the success translates to the NFL. However, it could potentially just not matter since his smaller frame could limit his success against press at the next level, regardless of how he uses his arms. Finally, his poor production in the past will make it a very difficult decision for NFL teams, whether they can trust him as a new and improved version of himself, or if he's just a mirage of a good receiver. So by taking the average of all his grades, Golden earned a 3.21 out of 4, which puts him in my good starter tier. Why Golden was suddenly more successful at the end of the season will be an interesting question to debate, but I think we can see it on the field and even in his stats. He was much more aggressive attacking the ball and had much stronger hands than in previous seasons, with his contested catch rates success jumping from 30% in 2023 to 61.1% in 2024, as well as having his drop rate drop from 13.3% in 2023 to 6.5% in 2024. He always had the athleticism, but now that I think he's able to pair that with his strong hands, that just made him such a more confident player. Also, I think his poor production in the past can be explained due to injury history and poor quarterback play at Houston. As for his slow start in 2024, I do think a lot of it did have to do with adjusting to Texas after transferring from Houston. Once he became integrated, I think he was able to let loose and focus on making plays on the ball. So while I definitely understand the skepticism about his sudden rise, I do think there's a storyline we can follow that helps explain it and makes sense why he became such a great player at the end of the year. As for a comp, it may be a lofty comp, but we are talking about a fast-rising prospect, which led me to comp him to a fast receiver in Jalen Waddle. Both Waddle and Golden have great athleticism and are very smooth movers in their routes. Both also have impressive ball tracking skills and confidence in attacking the ball in the air that make them appear bigger than they are. Also, both have very quick feet to help in their release success, but can also struggle to use proper hand use. Also, both do have thinner builds, which could complicate their success and ability to stay healthy in the NFL. Both even had pretty poor production for the majority of their years in college, with each only having one very productive season. Waddle was a fast riser in the 2021 draft due to a lot of the attention going to his teammate Devontae Smith. However, Waddle was trusted enough to be taken very high in the draft and has paid off that investment. While I don't see Golden being taken in the top 10 like Waddle was, I could see a team taking him higher than expected due to the potential that he has. If he continues to progress like he did in the second half of the 2024 season, I think we're going to see a very regular contributor and a force on offense like Waddle has been. Moving to the last receiver of this part, and shockingly the most productive from a statistical standpoint of this group, Nick Nash from San Jose State. It wasn't much of a contest competing with Nash's stats with a ridiculous 171 targets for 104 receptions, 1,382 yards, and 16 touchdowns in 2024. Now he did have 6 drops, but with the stupid amount of targets he got, that had his drop rate just go to 5.5%. Despite being 6'3", he actually played nearly all his snaps from the slot, which does add a bit of intrigue to his profile. For his highlight games, I didn't have a lot of options to go with, but decided to go with his games against Boise State, Oregon State, and Washington State for his state trifecta. He also had a great game trifecta with those games at least getting 8 receptions, 91 yards, and a touchdown in all of the highlighted games, and had a ridiculous 16 receptions and 152 yards in their double overtime matchup against Washington State. Looking at his season as a whole, he was a model of consistencies with only a single game with less than 5 receptions, 1 game with less than 75 yards, and just 1 game without a touchdown. Those ridiculous numbers now start to make sense of how he nearly won the receiving Triple Crown in 2024. However, Nash did have a very easy schedule, which does complicate those numbers. So to see how much that production shows in his grades, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he consistently catches the ball with late hands to give defenders little time to make a play on the ball. He also has tough hands and understands how to use his body to protect the ball to finish contested catch situations to a good 50% rate in 2024. He also consistently high points the ball and can contort his body with last second adjustments to make some really impressive catches even along the sidelines. In general, he consistently was able to finish catches at the very end of his frame, which goes very far with how big his frame is, and he can rise through contact to still make a play on the ball. He also isn't afraid of contact as he regularly was making catches in the middle of the field and would take hits from defenders. Also, he showed really good ball tracking skills, being able to finish catches over his shoulders as well. As good as his hands were, they did strangely seem a little bit iffy when making catches below his chest, as he sometimes had poor hand technique when going low for balls and relies too much on trapping the ball with his body. So Nash got off to a very strong start with a B+ for his hands, A- for his jump ball contested catch, and an A for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running release, he can improve his cuts but does have some good footwork to set up his defenders to get their hips open to make it easier to get quick leverage against off coverage. Also, he has a good eye for openings against zone coverage thanks to his past experience at quarterback, and is very smart with the way he cuts his routes off to be able to remain open. In terms of times he still faced press or early contact from the slot in 2024, he did use hand counters from his release to try to keep himself clean. Despite trying to keep himself clean though, his hand counters were often delayed, which led to him getting jammed up by press coverage. He also just isn't able to get much separation in his cuts, which often led to him needing to make tough catches with a defender near him. Also, though he can sometimes make sharp cuts, he sometimes sacrifices time as they can sometimes be slow developing. When he does try to speed up his process, his footwork is iffy and he often needs an extra step or two to gather himself. He also ran a pretty limited route tree and is coming from a gimmicky offense that helped boost his production. Also, he can sometimes be a bit awkward when trying to navigate around defenders who are in his way. Also, despite having a good frame, he can let physical coverage affect his route. He can also allow himself to lose leverage against more physical corners and also let them affect his route path as well. So his grades got bad really fast, with a C for his route running and even worse D+ for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role and athleticism harass, he has a good transition as a runner and good balance to withstand arm tackles. Also, though they aren't too explosive, he still has a good timing in his cuts to still give him a chance to be able to make defenders miss. However, as I mentioned, his cuts just aren't very explosive, and him himself is just not an overly explosive athlete. That limits how many tackles he can truly avoid, and also limits his big play potential with his lack of speed as well. Speaking of his speed and athleticism, he is just an okay, maybe even a bad athlete, based on how he looks when he plays and his combine testing. While it was good enough for the level of competition he played at, or at the very least it was just good enough to be able to make catches over smaller players like he did, I do worry if he can manage to do the same in the NFL or if he'll face a major wall. I was also disappointed in his blocking since he often looks like a former quarterback blocking at times with lack of successful blocks despite his big frame. As for his fit in the NFL, he seems to be set to be a big slot, but he does have the frame to move outside if needed. Personally, I think it would be best to keep him in the slot due to his struggles against press, so that means that he'll likely stay as a power slot, which I know a lot of people are advertising as this big exciting thing. And though I used to get excited about prospects being power slots or big slots in the NFL, current NFL coaches seldom use players like that due to the high rate of motion in the modern NFL. So while there is a place for a power or big slots, it could be very team dependent and may limit his options. So Nash's stumble continued with a C+ for his yards after catch potential, C for his future role, and C- for his athleticism harass. As a summary of his strengths, he has great tough hands that can engulf the ball. Also, he can engulf the ball if it's within his vicinity thanks to his big catch radius and knowing how to box out defenders with his big frame. He can also make some really nice late adjustments to throws to give defenders very little chance to make a play on the ball. Finally, while I again wouldn't advise it, he does have the frame to go on the outside if a coach does really want to force it. But like I said, I wouldn't recommend that he moves to the outside due to his difficulties beating press. Also, despite his great ball skills, I do want to see him do a better job using clean hand technique when catching under his chest, since it seems like he seems to be overthinking those throws due to limited experience as receiver. Also, limited experience as receiver shows with his limited route tree and iffy cuts. Finally, due to his lacking athleticism, he also won't be able to be much of a big play receiver and will likely need to make his money as possession receiver. So by taking the average of all his grades, Nash earned a 2.54 out of 4, which puts him in my may have a future role tier. Despite the great production, understand there are a number of good traits to Nash, I'm just not positive how his production will translate to the NFL. He has very good ball skills and a big frame to make him a friendly target. However, I have concerns his limited route tree and lack of explosiveness in the cuts will make it hard for him to separate against better athletes in the NFL. On top of that, he already struggled with physicality against lower level athletes, which likely won't get better in the NFL. So I think Nash moving to the slot was the best move for him, but I also worry that NFL teams will just try to push him outside due to his size, which could further limit him. As for a comp, I have Van Jefferson as a comp. Both have very good ball skills and are able to make some really impressive adjustments to expand their already big catch radius. Also, both are quick at establishing leverage and can use their big frames to protect the ball. However, neither are great athletes and may not contribute much after the catch or deep down the field. Back when Van Jefferson was in his draft class, I always thought he would work best as a big slot back when I first scouted him in 2020, but teams for some reason keep trying to force him outside. Maybe with Nash playing from the slot so much in 2024, teams will want to keep him there. Otherwise, I think he'll have a lot of the same difficulties that Van Jefferson has had from the outside so far in his NFL career. And that's all for part 7. Let me know what your thoughts are on all the receivers in the comments and who you think I'm too high or too low on. This is just part 7 of 10, so there'll still be some more evals that will come out over the next week or so. So to be sure you don't miss any of them, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the videos, it would help the channel and the series grow thanks to you. If you want just a written form of the eval, you can subscribe to my Substack as I hold a full written eval for each player out at the same time as the video. But thank you all, and see you all next time.